The deep rumble of motorcycle engines shattered the serene twilight as the Iron Vultures roared into the quiet cul-de-sac, their bikes snarling like beasts marking their territory. The neighborhood, typically tranquil at sunset, felt on edge as the gang parked their gleaming machines across the lawns. Leather vests emblazoned with skulls and chains reflected the fading light, and the men dismounted with cocky swagger, their laughter coarse and sharp. Inside the modest clapboard house at the end of the street, 97-year-old William Bill Carter, a decorated World War II veteran, sat by the window, sipping his evening tea. His frail hands rested on his cane, but his steel-gray eyes were as sharp as ever. He had fought on the front lines of Normandy, stared death in the face in the Ardennes, and returned home a hero. The years had taken their toll on his body, but not on his resolve. The laughter from outside grew louder, mixed with taunting shouts and the sound of glass bottles smashing. Bill's granddaughter, Sarah, peeked nervously through the curtains. "Grandpa, they're back," she said, her voice trembling. She glanced at her two young children playing quietly on the living room floor, their toys forgotten in the tension. Bill set his cup down with deliberate care and rose from his chair, gripping his cane tightly. "I know, sweetheart," he replied, his voice steady. "They've been pushing their luck for days now." The gang had made their presence known ever since they rolled into town, targeting families with harassment and intimidation. Sarah's home, situated on a corner lot with a wide front lawn, had become their favorite gathering spot. When Bill confronted them a week ago, they mocked his age and ignored his demands to leave. Tonight, they seemed bolder, their taunts louder, their presence more menacing. As the gang lit cigarettes and tossed trash onto the grass, Bill adjusted his weathered military jacket, the medals on his chest glinting faintly in the dim light. He turned to Sarah, his gaze firm. "Take the kids to the back room and lock the door. I'll handle this." "Grandpa, no," Sarah started, but Bill had already opened the door, stepping out into the cool evening air. The years may have slowed his body, but his spirit burned as fiercely as ever. "Hey!" he called out, his voice cutting through the gang's laughter like a knife. "Get off my lawn!" The gang turned their heads in unison, their laughter abruptly silenced as they stared at the old man standing on the porch. For a moment, they seemed unsure of what to make of him. The fading sunlight caught the glint of the medals on his jacket, a stark contrast to the weathered cane he leaned on. Bill's presence wasn't imposing in a physical sense. At his age, the years had taken much of his strength, but there was something in his eyes that made even the boldest hesitate. "Look at this," one of the bikers sneered, stepping forward. He was younger than most of the others, with a shaved head and tattoos running up his neck. "Gramps thinks he's still in the war." The rest of the gang chuckled, their confidence returning. The leader, a tall, burly man with a thick beard and an air of authority, stepped off his bike and approached. His vest bore the patch of their gang, the Iron Vultures, and his smirk oozed arrogance. "You again," he said, pointing a finger at Bill. "Didn't we already tell you to mind your own business? This lawn belongs to us now." Bill tightened his grip on his cane, his expression unyielding. "This lawn doesn't belong to anyone but my family, and I told you before, you're not welcome here." The leader scoffed and glanced back at his crew, who burst into laughter. "You hear that, boys? The old man thinks he can order us around. Maybe he needs a reminder of how things work." Bill didn't move. His voice remained calm, but his words carried the weight of someone who'd faced far greater threats than these men could ever imagine. "I've faced tougher men than you, son, and I'm still here." The gang leader's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly masked it with a scowl. "You think you're tough because you've got some medals? That jacket doesn't scare us." The younger biker from before chimed in. "Yeah, why don't you go back inside before you break a hip, old man?" Bill ignored the jab, his gaze steady. "This is the last time I'll ask nicely. Leave." The leader's patience snapped. He grabbed a glass bottle from his bike and hurled it toward the porch. It shattered against the steps, sending shards of glass flying. Sarah's muffled gasp came from inside the house, but Bill didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step forward, descending onto the lawn. "You shouldn't have done that," Bill said, his voice like steel. The leader barked a laugh. "And what are you going to do about it, old-timer? Hit us with your cane?" Bill's silence unnerved them more than any retort could have. Without breaking eye contact, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a weathered harmonica. The sight caught the gang off guard, and for a moment, confusion flickered across their faces. "What's this? Some kind of joke?" one of them muttered. Bill raised the harmonica to his lips and began to play a low, mournful tune. It was a melody he'd learned in the war, one that had carried him through nights of fear and uncertainty. The sound seemed to hang in the air, cutting through the tension like a knife. But it wasn't just the music that unsettled the gang, it was the movement in the shadows. From the edges of the street and the surrounding homes, figures began to emerge. At first they were hard to see, blending into the dimming light. But as they stepped closer, their forms became clear. They were men of varying ages, some older, some younger, but all carrying the unmistakable bearing of those who had seen battle. Some wore faded military jackets like Bill's, while others carried canes or leaned on crutches. They weren't as strong as they once were, but the fire in their eyes was unmistakable. The gang turned, their confidence wavering as the group surrounded them. The bikers had come expecting an easy night of intimidation, but now they found themselves outnumbered and, for the first time, unsure. One of the older men, a fellow veteran named Frank, stepped forward, his voice steady. "Bill called, and we came. You boys have two choices: walk away now or deal with us." The leader's bravado flickered. He glanced at his crew, then back at the encircling veterans. "You think we're scared of a bunch of old men?" he sneered, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Frank smiled faintly. "You should be." Bill lowered the harmonica and spoke, his tone cutting through the night. "I don't want any trouble, but if you think we're just going to stand by while you terrorize our families, you're in for a rude awakening." The leader's hesitation was clear, but his pride wouldn't let him back down completely. He motioned to his crew. "Let's go," he growled, turning toward his bike. "This isn't worth our time." Relief washed over the veterans as the gang began retreating, their bravado replaced by quiet unease. But as the last biker climbed onto his motorcycle, he turned back toward Bill, his face twisted in anger. "This isn't over, old man. You'll regret this." Bill didn't respond, simply watching as the gang sped off into the night. The sound of their engines faded, leaving the street eerily quiet once again. The veterans began dispersing, some patting Bill on the shoulder, others exchanging quiet words of reassurance. Frank lingered, his expression serious. "They'll be back," he said. Bill nodded. "I know, and we'll be ready." Back inside the house, Sarah hugged her grandfather tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You shouldn't have gone out there, Grandpa. It's too dangerous." Bill gently patted her back, his voice soft but resolute. "I've lived through worse, sweetheart, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect this family." As the night stretched on, Bill couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The gang's parting words echoed in his mind, a promise of more trouble to come. But he wasn't afraid. He'd faced the worst humanity had to offer and come out stronger. If the Iron Vultures thought they could break him, they were in for a rude awakening. Bill spent the next few days preparing. He called Frank and a few other veterans, organizing a watch system for the neighborhood. They took shifts patrolling the streets, their presence a quiet but firm message to the gang. Meadowbrook wasn't going to roll over. The Iron Vultures didn't take long to make good on their threat. Just 3 nights later, the unmistakable roar of motorcycles echoed down the street, louder and more menacing than before. This time, there were more of them, reinforcements no doubt brought in to settle the score. But Bill and his fellow veterans had anticipated this. The neighborhood was ready. As the bikers approached, they found the cul-de-sac eerily quiet, the houses dark. The leader barked orders to his crew, urging them to spread out, but before they could act, floodlights snapped on, illuminating the entire street. Standing shoulder to shoulder in the glow of the lights were Bill and a dozen other veterans, armed not with firearms, but with an assortment of tools, bats, and even garden implements. Their faces were resolute, their postures unwavering. The gang hesitated, caught off guard by the sheer determination in the men's eyes. The leader revved his engine, trying to intimidate them, but Bill stepped forward, his cane tapping steadily against the pavement. "This is your last chance," Bill said, his voice steady and firm. "Leave now and don't ever come back. Or stay and find out what happens when you pick a fight with men who have nothing left to fear." The leader hesitated, his eyes scanning the crowd of veterans. They were outnumbered, but not outmatched, and he could sense it. These weren't ordinary civilians. They were men who had seen war, who knew how to stand their ground. With a growl of frustration, he slammed his fist on his handlebars. "Let's go," he barked to his crew. "This place isn't worth it." One by one, the Iron Vultures turned their bikes and roared away, their bravado deflated. As the sound of their engines faded into the distance, the veterans let out a collective sigh of relief. Bill turned to his friends, a faint smile on his face. "We've won this round," he said, "and if they come back, they'll find us waiting." Sarah emerged from the house, her children in tow, and hugged Bill tightly. "Thank you, Grandpa," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Bill simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He'd fought for his family and his home, and he would do it again without hesitation. Peace had returned to Meadowbrook, for now.